Good morning. I'm Sherman Stanford, and this is Making Sense of the Chaos. And in fact, there is incredible amount of chaos in the world, isn't there? But anyone who denies that, I can't imagine where they're living. I can't imagine that they have the full use of their eyes and ears and their minds. But at any rate, we're talking about eschatology, the study of the last things, the end times. We've discussed amillennialism, which is the idea that there is no literal 1,000 years of ruling and reigning with Jesus. We've talked about historic premillennialism, and now we're on dispensational premillennialism, and I'm giving an account of the historical forces that resulted in the development of dispensation and acceptance of dispensational premillennialism. There are lots of ideas always percolating all over the place, and it's kind of like coming into contact with a virus. We have an immune system, and the immune system fights off the viruses. Well, for Christians, our immune system is the Word of God. And if our immune system becomes weakened, that is our adherence to and reliance on the Word of God, if that weakens, then our immune system becomes weakened, and those viral ideas that are spinning around us all over the place, they penetrate our heads, and from our heads, they get right down into our hearts. And they further compromise our commitment to God's truth, and they result in, of course, bad actions. So that's what was going on, and we'll pick up that thread at this point. I stressed earlier, many times, for a Christian, the fundamental paradigm for understanding history is to see it as God working His purposes through the actions flowing from the conflict between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. That's one of our 8 fundamental principles. For 2 months, we repeated those principles every day. But even after that, we're still repeating them twice a week. And I still refer to that fundamental principle on most every podcast, because I think it is absolutely fundamental to understanding what's going on in the world. You have this war between 2 great divisions of humanity. This is God working His purposes out in the world through the seed of the woman, His chosen people, and Satan working to oppose them, to try to defeat God and His purposes, a foil for God, if you will, through His people, His seed, all unbelieving human beings. Okay? And the ebb and flow between the conflict between these 2 seeds is what we see in the world, is what produces the conflict and the chaos. The conflict comes from, and the chaos comes from one side. Okay, now remember, we talked earlier, there are only 2 ordering principles within the world. Just really 2. There's either God as the source of all order, or if you deny God, all that's left is chance. And chance means complete randomness. And complete randomness can also be described as chaos. So either God is the ordering principle for the world, or chaos is. Those are the only 2 choices. Oh, people who deny God are not open about admitting that their ultimate ordering principle is chaos, because you see, as soon as you say it like that, it's pretty clear they got nothing. But they got nothing. They really got nothing. All right? And so what you see in the world today, if you look on the streets of America, you're seeing chaos. If you listen to the arguments of progressives, they appeal to emotions. They yell a lot to shut you up when you're making a reasoned argument against their positions. They nitpick, they equivocate, they draw inferences from something that you said regarding another subject to rebut what you're saying about this subject. They use all argumentative sleights of hand, everything which is intended to confuse and misguide you, mislead you, so that you will move on their side. And it all comes from chaos. It's all fueled by chaos, and it's all chaotic in how it's working out. I don't know how much plainer it can be. If you open your eyes and you look at the world, you see order on one side, okay? There's order coming from God and His Word. Everything is orderly. We follow principles of logic, of reason, sound argumentation, sound hermeneutics, sound exegesis to discover where the truth lies. And then on the other side, you've got a lot of yelling. That's what you got, a lot of yelling and appeals to emotion, pathos. Now, we should be emotional. We should have feelings, but we should not let our feelings be the things that lead us. And that's what they want to do. At any rate, remember now, this conflict between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, that sets the framework for everything that you're seeing in the world. Okay? As we discussed previously, those actions most broadly viewed over time show a general, albeit uneven, progress in favor of righteousness and the seed of the woman. But when more narrowly viewed, they have tended to assume an ebb and flow character, with first one side then the other dominant. And so if you're looking at a narrow enough window where the faithfulness of the seed of the woman is waning, it will look like the enemy, the seed of the serpent, is defeating God's people. That's what it looks like right now when you look out on the streets, when you watch your television, when you get on the internet. That's what it looks like, doesn't it? Well, why? Because you're looking at too narrow a window. You're not looking from God's perspective. God says who's going to win in the end. And it's not the seed of the serpent. It's the seed of the woman. God, through Jesus, wins. Through His people. He wins on earth and in time. Okay? His people crush the head of the seed of the serpent on earth and in time. But it takes a long time. And there's a lot of back and forth, ebb and flow. Martin Luther's posting of his 95 Theses on the door of the Wittenberg Church in 1517, followed by the writings and teachings of John Calvin in Geneva, and a host of other reformers sprinkled throughout Europe, ushered in what became a tidal wave of dominance for the seed of the woman. So, beginning in 1517 and lasting it's very hard to set specific dates, but you can make an argument that somewhere around 1700. You can even make an argument all the way up to around 1800, maybe even 1820. But it gets pretty weak by that point. The seed of the woman was in a position of dominance. The Reformation was still fueling the intellectual and theological beliefs and thinking of Western culture. The Reformation exploded onto the world scene in a blaze of brilliance, courage, and faith unequaled since the deaths of the original apostles. Okay. It wasn't that there weren't individuals earlier who had equaled these men. It was the systematic spread of the gospel, the systematic, widespread increase of righteousness, increase of understanding, return to the scriptural truths, return to God as our source of infallible truth. That's what I'm referring to. As leaven working through a lump of dough, the message of the reformers, as they preached and taught the doctrines of grace, brought changes in thinking that advanced the progress of man intellectually, religiously, culturally, and politically at an incredible rate within a relatively short span of time. Really, I'm telling you, within 20 or 30 years, the face of Europe was drastically changed. Now, you can argue that Roman Church was still very strong, and it was. But the foothold had been established, and the Reformed faith was growing and becoming increasingly dominant from, I would say 1530, 1540 onward for a couple of hundred years, for sure. The power of superstition and fear fueled by the Roman Catholic Church shrank against the Reformers' onslaught. The divine right of kings crumbled and fell by the wayside. Science threw off the shackles of paganism and superstition as a prelude to beginning real progress in understanding the physical cosmos. Additionally, representative democracy began its slow ascent, peaking in the founding of the American Republic on distinctly Calvinistic lines developed by self-conscious Calvinists and other men who were steeped in Calvinistic thought, men who saw the world through a Calvinistic prism, through God's eyes. In fact, the English called the American Revolutionary War the Presbyterian Rebellion, because Presbyterians, along with many Anglicans and Congregationalists, were Calvinists, although they are not necessarily so any longer. In fact, the PCUSA is simply liberal Christianity, which, as J. Gresham Machen has famously said, was neither Christian nor liberal. So if your very name means the opposite of what you are, maybe you don't have much. Anyway, the Calvinists formed much of the intellectual justification for the war. That's why the British referred to it as the Presbyterian War. As I have averred repeatedly, the ebb and flow traceable between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman is accounted for by the waxing and waning of the strength and vitality of the seed of the woman, not by the gain or loss of vitality by the seed of the serpent. All right? Why should that be? This is my thesis. This is what I contend is true. That the seed of the serpent, because it is committed to its rebellion against God and its pursuit of its own desires, its own love of its own selfish desires, is constant. Its opposition to God is constant. Now, it does not achieve success in its aims constantly, but it's always pushing against God. Okay, the impulse to rebel against God does not wax and wane within the seed of the serpent to any appreciable degree. I mean, obviously, the stronger they are, the more they'll exhibit their rebellion against God. I mean, obviously, somebody who's weak and infirm is not going to exhibit much rebellion against God, but if they are not Christians, if they have not been regenerated, then their attitude toward God is uniformly hostile to God. They are, as Paul tells us in Romans 8:7, they are enmity against God. That is their nature. That is what they are. Okay, it's not what they do primarily, it's what they are primarily. Now, they do hostile things toward God and his seed because they are enmity against God. Okay? It's not that we define them as enmity against God because they do these things. They do these things because that's what they are. They flow out of the abundance of hatred in their own hearts. Now, on the other hand, the seed of the woman is a mixed bag for several reasons. First of all, because there are many false confessors within the seed of the woman. Because the seed of the woman, as far as we're concerned, when we look out there, what we see is people who say they're Christians. We don't know who's really a Christian. You can't tell. God knows, but we don't. Now, when God is talking about the seed of the woman, he's talking about the people that he has chosen and regenerated. And so he knows exactly who they are. And he knows the difference between false confessors and true confessors. But we don't. And so when we look at the seed of the woman, when we look at the conflict between these two great divisions of humanity, what we see is those who confess Jesus Christ. But many of those are false confessors, false professors. They either because they're deluded or because they're intentionally trying to lead astray the faithful ones. But and then not only do we have that problem, but even in the hearts of every one of the true believers, you have the old person and the new person. Because Romans 7, where Paul talks about that which I would not do, I do, that which I would do, I do not. So I find then the law of sin at work in my members. He was referring to the fact that even though he had been regenerated and made into a new creature, he still had to fight the vestiges of the old man. That's why he tells us to mortify yourself daily. What are you mortifying? You're mortifying your sinful desires. Well, if you still have sinful desires, where are they coming from? They're coming from that old nature that God has defined as dead. Almost defined as dead, it takes a long time to finally die. It doesn't finally die until you die. So in the meantime, you're struggling within yourself with evil impulses, with humanistic impulses that compromise the mission, your mission, and collectively considered among all Christians, compromises the mission of the church to go ye therefore make disciples of all the nations of the world, teaching them all the things Jesus has taught us. Do we do that? Well, most of us no, we don't. Well, why not? We don't do that because we're not faithful. Why are we not faithful? Because we sin. Why do we sin? Because we have this tug of war in our own hearts between righteousness and unrighteousness. So you see, you have this one group that's unrelentingly, constantly pressing for unrighteous goals, unrighteous actions, unrighteous thoughts. And you have this other group that is a mixed bag, and that even among the true believers is a mixed bag in the sense of sometimes they're much more zealous for righteousness than other times. Sometimes they're pursuing their own agenda. Sometimes they've allowed themselves to become confused. They're still subject to the fall on this earth. So you have one group which waxes and wanes in its faithfulness, and you have the other group that's constantly pressing against them. All right? So, as a result of that, when you see this evil group gaining like you do right now, it's not because their strength is growing. It's not because their rebellion is growing. It's because the thing that was resisting their rebellion is weakening. And what is that? Us. Believers. Christians. So when we want to blame somebody for why the world looks like it looks, it's foolishness to blame the seed of the serpent for the mess in the world. They're doing the job God put them on the earth to do. He put them on the earth to bruise our heels. But we're supposed to be using those same heels to crush their heads. Instead, we're trying to run away from these little yapping dogs that are barking at our heels. Oh, look, the dog is chasing me. Hey, you the man. Turn around and say, that's enough. That's enough. A couple of weeks ago, I was walking with a neighbor woman in a neighborhood, and a dog came out, and she was walking her dog, and a dog came out to attack her dog. And in the brouhaha, she fell. Well, the next time we walked around that same circle, the dog started to come out, and I looked at the dog and I said, that's enough, back. And the dog stopped, growled a couple of times, but didn't make any further steps. Why? Because somebody resisted the evil impulse. The first time we didn't notice the dog, no one resisted the evil impulse, and the dog came. Now, you think the dog lost its desire to come after her dog just because I said stop? No. Still wanted to do it, didn't do it because there was resistance. Well, in the same way, it's when we resist the evil, they stop. What does the Bible say? Resist the devil and he will flee. Where? Well, he doesn't flee onto the stage of history and take over. That's not him fleeing. He goes into his fortress. And the walls of his fortress cannot stand against our attacks. But instead, we stop resisting him. We start running from him. Does that make sense? The unregenerate hate the regenerate and want to see them dead. There is no ambivalence in them regarding their enmity toward God and his seed. They continually react with enmity because Paul says they are enmity with God. Romans 8:7. Go look it up. It is their nature, their essence, who and what they are. The unrelenting impulse of this evil urge to harm the regenerate can be likened to a large lake held back by a dam. Okay, the water in the lake exerts constant pressure against the walls of the dam, but it cannot break through unless the dam weakens. The strength of the dam is the variable factor, not the force of the water. That's constant. Okay, if you got 7 million gallons of water in a reservoir, pushing against the dams of the reservoir, the dam of the walls of the reservoir, it constantly pushes at that same force. But if the walls weaken, what happens to the water in the lake, in the reservoir? It goes rushing forth, doesn't it? Well, we are the walls. We hold back the evil ones. Now, when we weaken in our resolve to hold them back, the walls weaken. Here comes the water. But the water didn't get any stronger. Did the force of the water get stronger? No. It's the same amount of water. Same amount of water. Same force. The walls weaken. The variability of the restraint that we exert against the seed of the serpent is determined by the strength or weakness of the ebbs and flows of our faithfulness. In short, the key to tracing that ebb and flow of evil in the world by the seed of the serpent is to chart the faithfulness of the seed of the woman. When you see them thriving, what you may be certain is not that they've gotten stronger. It's that we've gotten weaker. Then you have to look for the causes of the weakness. Where do you start? You start with the person who wears your clothes. You start with the person that you see when you look in the mirror. Him, you, me. I start with me. Okay? Now, if I am certain that I'm living my life the right way, and I'm certain that I am spreading God's word as I go, I'm teaching the world the things that Jesus has taught me, then I know that I'm doing my part. I'm being faithful. And whatever happens in the world, well, that's between those people and God. But I'm doing my part. And you have to do your part. And if each of us does our part, what we'll find is the bad guys will run. Resist the devil and he will flee. Does this just mean Satan, or does it mean the people who are operating in the power of Satan in rebellion against God? Well, obviously, it has to mean those people as well. I mean, there's only one Satan. There's 7 billion people in the world. Satan is a finite creature. He's not God. He cannot be everywhere at the same time. How long would it take him to tempt each of 7 billion people in the world within their own lifetimes? Oh, I don't know. That would take some math. Let's say it takes him 20 seconds to tempt any one of those. Then he's got, 3 opportunities per minute, 180 per hour. And go ahead and do the math. And whatever you have, whatever that is, for the lifetime of one person, whatever number that is, now you got to figure, multiply that by 7 billion. And I think what you'll find is that he can't possibly do that. He can't possibly do that. And so some of the people, some of the agents who are working for Satan are in fact spirit beings. That's true. How many of those are there? Well, I don't know. It's a third of the total angels, whatever that means. I don't know. We're not told. But many of them wear flesh like we do. They are agents of Satan. You're either an agent of God or you're an agent of Satan. There's no in between, is there? Oh, I'm neutral. I'm neutral. I'm standing on this neutral ground. God didn't make this ground. That reminds me of the complaint that we heard when the president was making his speech in South Dakota at the statues, carved faces of the presidents. Rushmore, Mount Rushmore. I knew he was going to help me out. When you get old, these words slip out of your head and you can't find them. They're gone. Well, anyway, they were saying that he was standing on stolen ground. Well, let me tell you, if you take that approach, which part of the North American continent was not occupied by American Indians before we came here? All of it was. So which part's not stolen ground? I mean, the CNN telecast that was complaining about that was launched from a building that was on stolen ground. If they thought it was such a terrible thing to occupy stolen ground, why didn't they give it back to the American Indians? Everybody who complained about President Bush standing on stolen ground at Mount Rushmore, why didn't they promptly call up an Indian tribe and say, listen, I'm gonna sign over the title to my property back to you because we stole it from you? Let me guess. None of them did that. Why? Because they don't really believe that. That's nonsense. And in the same way, there is no ground that you can stand on that you're not taking from God. It's all God's ground. It's all. And if you don't acknowledge that you're standing on God's ground, then you're a rebel against God and you're stealing the air you breathe and the ground you stand on and the shoes that you stand in. Well, I earned those shoes. Okay, and who gave you the power to earn your shoes? Who gave you the skill you have? Well, I'll learn the skill on my own. Well, who gave you the mind to earn the skill? Well, my parents did, all right? And who gave you parents? Come on now. Come on now. It's nonsense. But listen, to expect anything but chaos out of those people is nonsense too, right? I mean, that's who they are. That's where they're coming from. That's where they go. They have nowhere else to come from. They have nowhere else to go. A faithful reading and application of scriptural principles shows that what look like examples of the strengthening of Satan's kingdom are really examples of the weakening of God's kingdom. The bruising of the heel of the seed of the woman by the seed of the serpent is set up every time by the ebbing of righteousness by the seed of the woman. It is an illusion to see the seed of the serpent winning in any conflict with the seed of the woman. They do not win. We lose. Is that clear? They never win. We may lose, but they never win. They never have the winning hand. We may play our winning hand so badly that we lose, but our hand is always the winning hand. We have all the aces in the deck. We have all the kings. We have all the queens. We have everything. They don't. They got chaos. Chaos. They never get a hand that's a winning hand. They cannot, because they're always dealing from chaos to chaos. When the seed of the serpent appears ascendant on top, what is happening is the seed of the woman is losing because of her weakening faith working itself out negatively in countless points of contact with the seed of the serpent. Okay? If you're weak as water, don't be surprised that folks run right over you. But it's not because they're strong, it's because you're weak. They are not strong. They're not strong. When you stand against them, they will flee. God promises us that. Well, it doesn't look like it. All right, so who are you going to trust? Your lying eyes or God? We have nothing to fear from them. They have nothing except screaming and hollering and offering more and more chaos. Does chaos defeat order? Never. They're gonna make an orderly world out of chaos. They hate the United States, and they're gonna turn the United States into what? An orderly world based on hatred and disorder and chaos? Really? Yeah. The natural response to success among humans is to slide into complacency. Complacency causes people to lower their guard. If you've ever coached an athletic team that won everything, that won the whole championship, you understand how complacent they can be to begin the next season and how difficult it is to combat that complacency. It is really tough. Their heads are so big they can't fit into their helmets if it's a football team. Thus, the pattern that emerged over time following the Reformation showed progressively relaxing vigilance by the seed of the woman, resulting in small compromises regarding what were rationalized as non-essential issues, although there are no such things as non-essential issues. If it's the truth, it's the truth. You hold the line at what's true against what's false on every issue at every time, in the interest of greater harmony within humanity. Well, I don't want to make them feel bad. I want to make them feel included. Well, listen, if they reject God, they're not included in God's people. It's perfectly simple. The seed of the woman increasingly overlooked the unabating hostility and enmity of the seed of the serpent presented in the great antithesis. And we're doing it now, aren't we? While the seed of the serpent remained and remains a hostile enemy army, the result was predictable and certain. I see we've run through our time. I trust this has been helpful for you. I certainly enjoy teaching, especially teaching these absolutely fundamental truths upon which all of reality is founded. And it is my prayer and my hope that I won't teach you anything that's not true, and the truths I'll teach you will lodge in your heart and cause you and me both to continue to grow ever more into the image of our beloved Savior, Jesus Christ. Bill, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Tomorrow, 7:30.
Yes, thank you, Bill. Tomorrow is Wednesday, and I'll be meeting with my brother and our friend Earl, and so we won't start until 7:30, but after that we'll be back at 7. So tomorrow only, 7:30 in the morning, not 7. In the meantime, have a wonderful day. May God bless you. And remember, there are worse things than dying. And the worst of all is being unfaithful to God. May God bless you.